Cathie Wood just went on a monologue and she made some pretty excellent and optimistic views on how she sees this current market. When Cathie speaks, I listen. Check this out.
We've been thinking and giving you evidence over the last 3 years that the U.S. economy has been in a rolling recession, manufacturing negative for 3 years, small businesses suffering, low and middle income consumers suffering, even capital spending. I know the headlines are all about AI and power needs, but X those, we've seen a flattening out, if not a decline, in many capital spending sectors. So we now are looking at the early days of this Trump administration. Seems like a lot of drama and headlines, primarily about tariffs. But underneath, in terms of real policy moves, OB3, so the one big beautiful bill, which passed on July 4th, included some massive changes in tax policy. I think the most important ones involve depreciation, and they are taking the effective corporate tax rate. The statutory tax rate is still 21%, but incorporating depreciation schedules, the new ones, for manufacturing facilities, equipment, domestic R&D, and software. The effective corporate tax rate has probably dropped into the 10 to 12% range, which makes it really the lowest in the world for any major economy. So we do believe that we're moving from a rolling recession into a rolling recovery. It's going to take a little time to catch fire. And we think that employment is a lagging indicator. So we're going to hear more bad news about employment for both cyclical reasons and because AI is limiting the job opportunities for especially new college graduates. But we do think that the tax policy changes and critically deregulation everywhere. The edict from on high was deregulated, and we are seeing it all over the place, especially in healthcare and crypto and even AI. The first executive order that President Trump rescinded was Biden's AI executive order, because we really do believe right now we're still in very early stages, the equivalent of 1995 in terms of the internet. We're in early stages as it relates to AI, and there were some onerous regulations moving into the policymaking arena. We believe we're moving into a productivity-driven boom in activity. I think the plan was this, to the extent President Trump and team could control it, get all the bad news out early in this term. And as we move into the election campaign season for the midterms, have the economy move into a very strong expansion. So that's what we expect. And because it's productivity driven, we believe that the surprises will be on the low side of inflation expectations. So this is very much like the economy that Reaganomics unleashed in the 80s and 90s. And we think that this could be a much more powerful version of that. So we're very excited about the outlook for the economy, innovation, and the markets generally.
I'm going to come back with one more just on the macro side here too. We're hearing a lot of talk about just US dollar weakening and gold and Bitcoin and how that relates, gold hitting new highs. Can you just give us your kind of quick take on that?
Yes, it's very interesting. I just took a trip around the world, actually, and I saw the negative sentiment about the U.S., mostly because of the headlines, tariffs. They've really colored the point of view of investors in the rest of the world. And, I heard dollar weakness, a familiar refrain abroad. First half of the year, weakest dollar since, by some metrics, 1973. And I gave them the outlook that I just described here and actually took the opposite point of view. I think the dollar, and this happened during Reaganomics as well, I think the dollar is going to go up. And that's because I believe, given the policies that have been put in place, that the returns on invested capital in the US are going to go up relative to the rest of the world, and that foreign direct investment will increase substantially, we think is going to be a surprise. One of the reasons gold has been going up is this narrative. The dollar is debasing, and so that's a boon for gold and for Bitcoin. Well, if the dollar becomes as good as gold, and this is an expression that Art Laffer, you've heard me talk about Art and the Laffer curve. He's also a monetary expert. And as we've been discussing this scenario with him, he brought this framing back, which is, well, if the dollar becomes as good as gold, then why hold gold? So we shall see. Gold did go down. It peaked in the early 80s, actually 1980, at $800, and went down over the next 2 years to $300 with that kind of dollar strength. The dollar strength did not end until 1985. The dollar actually doubled from its low to its peak in 1985, at which point the rest of the world was suffering. There was a huge amount of dollar-denominated debt in countries whose currencies were depreciating rapidly. So debt service became onerous, if not impossible. And we ended up with a worldwide easing effectively, with the dollar providing more dollars. The US providing more dollars into the global ecosystem. I think we're going to be back to the future on that as well. As far as Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin is digital gold, but as we've said many times, it is also a technology, and it's the first of its kind in a new asset class. That paper, I believe, is still on our website. Maybe we can put it into this webinar. First of its kind in a new asset class, and institutions have just started tiptoeing into it.
Everyone's freaking out about tariffs and dollar weakness, but Cathie Wood is looking at something completely different. The biggest corporate tax cut in modern history that nobody's talking about. The effective corporate tax rate just dropped to 10 to 12% through new depreciation rules, making the US the lowest tax major economy and setting up a productivity-driven boom that most people are completely missing. Cathie explains that while the statutory corporation tax remains 21%, new depreciation schedules for manufacturing facilities, equipment, domestic R&D, and software have dropped the effective rate to probably around the 10 to 12% range, making it the lowest in the world for any major economy. Cathie says this is combined with deregulation everywhere. The directive was deregulate, 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 especially in healthcare, crypto, and AI. She believes we're moving from a rolling recession into a rolling recovery. This is maybe the most underappreciated policy change of 2025. Everyone's obsessing over tariff headlines, while a fundamental restructuring of corporate taxation just happened with almost no media coverage. The statutory rate staying at 21% is what gets reported, but the effective rate is what actually matters for corporate decisions. Depreciation schedules determine how fast companies can write off investments. If you can immediately expense manufacturing facilities, equipment, R&D, and software in year one, instead of depreciating them over 5 to 15 years, your effective tax rate plummets. You're getting massive tax shields that reduce actual taxes paid to a fraction of the statutory rate. At 10 to 12% effective rate, the US becomes the most attractive developed market for corporate investment by a huge margin. Germany's effective rate is around 30, France 25, UK 19, Japan 30%, and China 25. The US just became the global tax haven for productive business investment. This creates a compounding effect. Lower taxation means higher returns on investor capital. High returns attract more capital investment. More investment means more productivity growth. More productivity growth means companies can grow revenue without proportional headcount increases. That's how you get sustained economic expansion without triggering inflation. Productivity gains offset wage increases. Cathie makes an interesting comparison to Reaganomics. The 1980s tax cuts and deregulation unleashed a 2-decade boom, but Reagan's corporate tax cuts were modest compared to this. dropping from 46% to 34%. Going from an effective 21 to 10 to 12% is a much larger relative change. But the economic implications go way beyond just growth. They completely flipped the conventional wisdom about the dollar. The dollar is likely to strengthen significantly, not weaken, because higher returns on US capital will drive massive foreign direct investment, exactly like what happened during Reaganomics when the dollar doubled. Everyone's worried about dollar debasement from deficits and tariffs disrupting trade, but Cathie's looking at capital flows, not trade flows, and capital flows are what actually determine currency strength over time. The mechanism is straightforward. If US effective corporate tax rates are 10 to 12%, whilst Europe is 25 to 30%, where would you invest $100 million building a new factory? The after-tax returns in the US are dramatically higher. That preference drives foreign direct investment, which requires buying dollars to make those investments. Higher demand for dollars makes the dollar stronger. The Bitcoin angle is interesting because Cathie acknowledges it both as digital gold, it competes with physical gold. If the dollar strengthens significantly, both could face headwinds. But as a technology and new asset class, Bitcoin has different drivers: institutional adoption, technological improvement, and network effects. Those factors might offset currency strength impacts. But there's also something else at play here. Lower effective corporation tax rates accelerate investment into innovation, meaning Cathie's bullish timelines for technology like AI, robots, and autonomy might actually happen faster than she originally predicted. Cathie has been consistently bullish on disruptive innovation for years, but has always been constrained by how fast companies could actually deploy capital into those technologies. High corporate taxes mean companies had less cash to reinvest. Slow regulatory approval meant projects took years longer than necessary. Both factors extended her timelines. Now, both constraints just lifted simultaneously. Companies can immediately expense all their R&D and equipment spending, which means every dollar invested generates massive tax shields. A company spending $1 billion on AI infrastructure previously paid taxes on profits before investing. Now they can expense that $1 billion immediately, reducing their tax bill by $1 to $200 million depending on the structure. That's $1 to $200 million more capital to invest into the next round of innovation. This creates a feedback loop for Cathie's investment thesis. She's been betting on exponential technology curves in genomics, AI, robotics, energy storage, and blockchain. She's been betting on those curves always going to happen eventually, but the speed at which they happen depends on capital availability and regulatory friction. Both just improve dramatically. We don't have crazy perks yet, but if you believe in what we're doing and want to help us keep going, joining as a member really helps make a difference. Every bit of support really helps. Thank you.